So I think it's safe to say that victims of rape and sexual assault have really been leading the charge against Kavanaugh, and Republicans are going out of their way to demonize these brave protesters. Donald Trump frequently refers to them as screamers. Mitch McConnell called them the mob. Chuck Grassley also called them the mob. And really, it's sickening, because I don't think there's anything more democratic than protesting your elected public officials. But if you're a Republican and you get triggered by someone who disagrees with your agenda, then they have to demonize and vilify those protesters because it makes them look bad. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez appeared on MSNBC in an interview with Chris Hayes, and she was asked to respond to Chuck Grassley's comments in particular about the way he's vilifying these protesters and referring to them as the mob. And she gave what I think is the perfect response, and she's proving that she has the exact mindset needed from a representative in this day and age when politicians just are refusing to listen to voters.
To me, I sort of feel like yelling at an elected representative is literally a definition of a free society in like a literal sense. Like that's what a free society allows. You can yell at someone in power. They can't like come to your house and take you away.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But they didn't like it so much. I want to play you Chuck Grassley talking about mob rule and get your response.
Sure.
Take a listen.
They have encouraged mob rule. When you hear things about get in their face, bother people at every restaurant where you can find a cabinet member, these are coming from public service that ought to set an example of civility in American society. And it's been made worse by what has happened to Judge Kavanaugh. I hope we can say no to mob rule by voting to confirm Judge Kavanaugh.
No to mob rule.
Well, first of all, American democracy is built by the people, for the people. It is our attempt at Americans pursuing self-governance. But, I think if a lot of these Republican senators are upset at the reaction that's going on, maybe they should stop running away from their town halls. Maybe they should visit their constituents. Maybe they should pick up the phone. Maybe they should answer emails. But because they are running away from the basic tenets of democracy, our job is not to preside over our communities. Our job is to listen to our communities. Our job is to serve our communities. And when we are not serving our communities by making sure that we are vetting justices, that we are pursuing due process, that we are listening to sexual assault survivors in our communities, then we aren't doing our job. And these folks are not doing their job.
I mean, what Chuck Grassley said there was just appalling, and I don't know how he's not ashamed of himself. As Republicans ruin our lives and commit acts of political violence against us, they expect civility. They demand civility, rather. Well, guess what, Chuck, and Donald Trump, and Mitch McConnell, and all of these other right-wing babies who are referring to protesters as the mob. If you're going to ruin our lives, we're going to disrupt yours. And if you want to actually have a civilized discussion with your constituents, you could do that. You could hold a town hall with your community. You can respond to phone calls and emails. So what they're saying is ridiculous, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez echoed my feelings on this perfectly. She said, if a lot of these Republican senators are upset at the reaction that's going on, maybe they should stop running away from town halls. Maybe they should stop running away from constituents. Maybe they should pick up the phone. Maybe they should answer emails. And that is exactly what they needed to hear. That's exactly what someone needed to say in the mainstream media, where that message is likely going to get to these politicians. And if you don't, if you continue to hide in the bathroom to avoid female protesters, who are peaceful protesters, mind you, then you can expect a lot more disruptions of your dinners at fancy restaurants. Because if they have no other means of reaching you and getting the message across, then you're giving them no choice. They have to disrupt your dinner because clearly that's the one thing they can do that creates media attention and gets Republicans to pay attention to their message. Now, Republicans may not care when they hear that message, but nonetheless, they're getting the message, regardless if they disagree with it and don't act on it. But I think the thing that irritates me the most about all of these Republicans who are trying to demonize and vilify all of these protesters is that, first of all, you're demonizing people who are doing what democracy entitles them to. Protesting. As Chris Hayes said at the start of the clip, protesting and yelling at your elected officials is only one of the most American things that you can do. It's as American as apple pie. So if you are going to vilify them for doing what is permitted under the First Amendment, then you just need to come out and be honest with us. You don't care about democracy. You're openly hostile now towards democracy. And the other thing that irritates me is that what elected officials aren't realizing, Chuck Grassley, Mitch McConnell, Donald Trump, is that they don't rule over us contrary to popular belief. We're their boss. We pay their checks. Our tax dollars are paying for those fancy dinners at restaurants. We're the ones that hire them. We're the ones that fire them. We are their bosses. But these politicians don't get that. And I wish that more Americans would have this mindset that they're their bosses. You're in control of these politicians. They represent you and nobody else. So they're supposed to anyways, even though they don't. But you're their bosses. So you can act like that. If you're a boss and you have subordinates, what do? Well, if they're not doing a good job, then you reprimand them. And if that still doesn't work, if you give them verbal and written warnings, then you have to fire them. That's how you have to treat politicians, because you are their boss. Without them, or without you, they wouldn't get paid, because that's your tax dollars that go into their paychecks. Now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in this next clip talks about what's needed from representatives, and she is proving that she is really going to be a phenomenal representative, because the way that she engages with constituents, I mean, the difference between someone like her and Chuck Grassley really is night and day. So here's what she says about how she listens to her constituents and what other lawmakers should do to emulate her style of representing her district.
A lot of it's about listening and keeping an open mind, right? I mean, you're going to have decisions that you're going to have to encounter with where constituents might have different politics than you, the folks you represent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is part of why we've been so successful in the district, is because people understand that our campaign and my candidacy has a very specific point of view, but also in part, actually largely in part, because I do not take any corporate lobbyist money, they know that I'm working for them. They know that they can call my office and pick up the phone and say, hey, this is something that we disagree with, and that I have an obligation to listen to my community. Sometimes I feel like I have this job of being something of a social worker or even a therapist in my district, because this period has been so re-traumatizing for so many folks, and especially in a country where we do not have reliable access to health care, let alone affordable health care.
Let alone mental health care.
Let alone mental health care. This has been a very difficult time for immigrants, for women, for survivors, for people who just care about the health of American democracy. It's very stressful. And so that listening diffuses a lot of the tensions in our communities, and it's a form of active work beyond just legislation or beyond just policy making. It's really getting hands deep and our hands dirty in our communities and saying and finding the issues that we need to solve instead of just waiting for them to wash up on our door. And I think that really what we're seeing here with Kavanaugh, with all of this stuff, is just a complete abdication of responsibility, of our responsibility as representatives. When you are at the point where you are blaming your own constituents and calling your own constituents a mob, that is the exact opposite of being a representative. That is the exact opposite of being a public servant. And that tells me that those folks, anybody, regardless of your party, if you have that attitude, you gotta go.
So what she said there about basically being a social worker or a sort of therapist to her constituents, that is the exact mindset that someone who is truly representing their base would have. That's the way that they would behave. Because your goal is to listen. You don't necessarily have to agree with everything your constituents say. I mean, this is a big country, right? There's a lot of disagreement intellectually when it comes to policy. So you're not going to agree with everything your constituents say, but it's your job to listen. And that's what she even said. I am paid to listen to my constituents. I mean, she's not elected yet, right? But if she is elected, and hopefully she will be, then that's her job. It's to listen. But for some reason, that principle is lost on members of Congress, especially Republicans. Now, she also says here that for the politicians who don't represent their constituents, quote, when you are at the point where you are blaming your own constituents and calling your own constituents a mob, that is the exact opposite of a representative. That is the exact opposite of being a public servant, and that tells me that these folks, anybody, regardless of party, if you have that attitude, you gotta go. And that is exactly it, because you got that job because of voters. They gave you that position, and they can take it away. And if you're not going to listen to them, then you've got to go. And of course, this goes for the Democratic Party as well. Dianne Feinstein, individuals like Claire McCaskill, who are corporate Democrats, who don't want to listen to their constituents who want Medicare for all, or a federal jobs guarantee, they've got to go too, because we live in a representative republic. That means that we elect people to represent us, and they can't effectively represent us if they're not listening to what we want. But politicians have gotten so out of touch, and they only listen to their big dollar donors, that now the mere prospect of having to listen to the peasants and hear them scream at you is appalling to them. They call them the mob. Well, this goes to show you that that's how far democracy has fallen in the United States. And I don't even think it's accurate to call the U.S. a democracy, especially when you see elected officials now openly hostile towards people who are exercising their First Amendment rights. So these Republicans are an absolute disgrace. And this is a message to all of their base, that if you try to confront them about something that you disagree with, they're going to call you the mob and try to vilify you. That's how entitled pricks like Chuck Grassley, Mitch McConnell, and Donald Trump are.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.